Welcome back, everybody. I'm really sorry to disturb, but there's a program waiting for you. And something very special happened. I already mentioned that we have today with us Michael Haupt. And actually he was going to, and probably he is going to share with you his vision on what he calls Society 4.0, which means that we don't only have new technologies around us, but we, and especially as technologists, should also think about the design of society. You cannot just create new technologies and put them in the existing society and then expect that everything stays the same. Are we still fit for the future, or do we need to redesign this world? And I mentioned that he has a very interesting story, and I thought that he was not going to share it with us. He just came to me. He said, Danny, I heard you saying that, but I was thinking on the plane. He said, I am going to share my story today. He said, I'm a bit nervous. I told him, well, you know, those are the kindest people from the Netherlands and from abroad, so they will be very kind for you. But he's going to share his personal story with you. So he's a certified strategic foresight practitioner. He's from Cape Town. He's executive director at Project 2030, a grassroots collective dedicated to co-creating a world that works for 100%. He lived in 16 cities on every continent except Antarctica, and not in space, I believe. And I read somewhere that he used to go to school barefooted. He is with shoes, however, today. Can I please have a warm applause for Michael Haupt?
Good morning, everybody. My talk today is going to be about the human condition, much more than about climate change. Some of the things I'm going to say you may not agree with, or you may feel very uncomfortable about. So as we've just heard, I'm going to tell a little about my story, about the journey that got me here. We're going to cover a whole lot of different topics because I'm trying to show you how all of this weaves together. The slides are available at bit.ly/society4. So don't worry about taking notes, you can see it all there. So my background is I'm a technologist, although I'm an old school technologist, so I carry my notes on sheets of paper. I started way back in 1986 as a COBOL programmer. Yes, that really is a language. My computer programs used to run overnight, reading data from magnetic tape. So that's how old school I am. I started in South Africa, implemented billing systems for telecommunications companies, and I was headhunted a number of times, so I was very fortunate to live in 16 cities. The red dots are the places I lived. The blue dots are the places that I visited. I stopped counting after 400 places of visiting because I'd just been to so many. What was incredible, though, is over a period of 30 or 35 years, I witnessed the degradation of this beautiful planet that we lived on, and it breaks my heart. I would see beautiful, pristine beaches and go back years later, and they were destroyed. And what do you do? So the topic of my talk today is around changing behavior. If we look at all that incredible data that Andre presented earlier, images from space, everything that we measure on this planet, and yet we still continue the behaviors that we do. Why is that? That's the burning question I have. And it's relevant, I think, for you, because you're part of measuring data. You're part of reporting back what society is like. And so I'm hoping to provide some ideas. I don't have any answers. This is a hugely complex topic, but I'm hoping to provide some ideas for you to think about as you start your careers. This is the bit that gets personal, and I must admit I'm very nervous about sharing this, but I'm going to go ahead. This is the first time I'm sharing this publicly, so go easy on me. My last assignment was in Taipei, Taiwan. I just finished a multi-million-dollar computer system implementation. Was given a huge payout, so I had lots of money, lots of time on my hands, and didn't really know what to do. So I decided to go back to Thailand, because I'd done business there before, loved the Thai people, but had never got a chance to explore. So the idea was to go backpacking through Thailand. Now, because I was a city slicker, I arrived in Bangkok. I had my full business class allowance of luggage, 32 kilograms of stuff that was supposedly important. Fortunately met a number of backpackers and eventually just got rid of all this stuff that really was not important. In hindsight, I think what was going on in my head as I journeyed down and traveled down to some of the islands, that's an actual picture that I took, is just decluttering from the life that you become so accustomed to, just embracing a different style of lifestyle where you're walking barefoot on the beach every day and eating simple meals and being with the local folk. It was an incredibly moving time of my life. And at some point I found myself on a beach on one of the islands, Koh Phi Phi. It's very close to where the movie The Beach was filmed. And that evening, just before dinner, lying back on my back, actually seeing the satellites going across the sky every 20 minutes, the skies were so clear, and becoming very aware of my surroundings and circumstances, hearing the waves crashing, the rustling of the palm trees in the background, smelling the fish being barbecued on the fire, and just feeling the sand, just being very, very aware of all of my surroundings. And then in the middle of that process, I felt myself floating and lifting off the beach. I was like, well, hold on, what's going on here? There was no substances involved. I wasn't going on any kind of journey, searching for anything. But it was profound, and felt myself lifting completely off the beach. And eventually I could see the entire island, the entire archipelago, and then eventually the whole planet, like Andre saw, but I wasn't in a spaceship. And there's a feeling that came that was incredibly real, of being 100% part of all of this, of being a part of the universe. And it's like, it's difficult to describe the experience because it's like a freight train smashing into you at high speed. The entire experience really rattled me because before this happened, I was a pragmatic technologist. I don't believe in all of this sort of woo-woo spiritual stuff. But what resulted out of that experience was a 2-year sabbatical where I gave up working and I traveled between Thailand and Malaysia, backpacking, meeting interesting people, discovered an incredible bookstore in Bangkok, which unfortunately no longer exists, was introduced to the work of some of the people there, in essence being told that the human mind, we only know a tiny little percentage of what it does. We don't understand the entire subconscious part of the mind. So a profound period of time for me where I almost unlearned everything that I'd learned from a technology perspective and was introduced to this deeply philosophical perspective of life. A second thing that happened in the experience was I was given a crystal clear vision of a future society. Let's just call it Society 4, where Society 1 was what happened as a result of the agricultural revolution, Society 2 was the industrial revolution, Society 3 was the digital revolution that we're all part of now, and Society 4 is something as yet undefined. It's emerging. And I've put the word boring on this typical utopian image, the tech utopia that we often think about, because that's not the kind of vision I was given. It was a vision where we all cooperate as living species. And there were concepts in this vision that were incredibly difficult to define and describe. Even now, I can't do it. But what I ended up doing was for the next 3 days without sleep, just wrote down longhand on pieces of paper everything that I could remember from the vision. Now, none of it made sense at the time because the technology didn't exist to be able to build this kind of society. So what do you do with something like that? I didn't want to get rid of it. It was a deeply moving experience. But where do you start with something like that? So for the next few years, all I would do at the end of each year is page through those notes and remind myself about that vision. Again, not knowing what to do about it. Then in October 2004, some of you may be familiar, a little white paper was released around an idea of Bitcoin. I'm not a cryptocurrency fan at all. I don't have any Bitcoin, so I'm not trying to push Bitcoin on you. But what I started doing as a result of that paper was finding other blockchain projects and researching deeply many of the paper. What these companies do is when they come up with a big idea that they want to develop on the blockchain, they write a white paper and describe what their thinking and vision is. And what was profoundly exciting was seeing the common themes that came out. Now, the papers were unconnected from each other. Very often the project founders didn't know anything about each other. They were from different geographical regions on the earth. But there were very common themes that reflected strongly what I'd seen in the vision. And it's all around decentralization, removing the middleman, us being responsible and taking more of an active role in managing our lives, in managing the planet that we live on. So that was interesting. For the first time, the sort of penny dropped for me when I read the Bitcoin white paper saying, okay, so there is technology and other people are thinking along these same lines. That was the most important thing for me, that the vision that I was given was not just something for myself. Okay, so what I'd like to do at this stage is, one other thing I want to mention around this. What I then decided to do is write about this society, but in a way that was much more easily understood than the blockchain white papers, because here were technologists, they were writing from a very tech perspective, and at the same time I was aware of social activists who were very concerned about what was happening on the planet, but the language that the tech people were speaking could never be understood by the social activists. And so I thought, how do I communicate or let social activists know that tech people are busy developing platforms that could help them? So I'm a single dad to a little 5-year-old daughter. She will turn 21 years old in 2035. So when I started writing the story, I called it Postcards from 2035. And it's my daughter writing back to us, telling us what her society is like. So my research was heavily influenced by technical white papers, as well as the vision I'd received, and then telling the story, but from the perspective of a young girl. Now, I put a little red arrow there because from a standing start of 0, I built up a following of 18,000 people. Now, that's not because I write particularly well. I think it's because people are desperate for a new story. We've lost our sense of meaning. And to me, it's not about climate crisis, it's a meaning crisis. We'll get into some of the reasons I say that later, but that number indicates to me that people are hungry for a new story. And we'll come back to the idea of story and data. So let's for a minute go to all the protests that are happening around the world. And my question is, what do protesters want? So many of them have a particular series of demands, but in essence, what they're looking for is a change of behavior. And some of them are specific, some of them are not. They have some ideas about the way in which we should change behavior. But my contention is that you can't easily change behavior within a system. You have to change the entire system itself. So I want to give you some examples about how difficult this is and why it's so difficult. Let's just go on to a quote quickly from Donella Meadows, who's one of the early systems thinkers, and she influenced the way people think about big systemic change. So a system is a set of things. We are a system. We people that came together, we were told to be here at a certain time, all kinds of travel arrangements were made, a bus came to pick you up. So this is a system. It's made up of people, cells, molecules, or whatever. But they're interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time. So a system produces a pattern of behavior over time. Now here's the sad part about this systems thinking. A very important function of almost every system is to ensure its own perpetuation. So no matter how much protesters protest, and no matter how much demands are made of governments and big business, the system itself is designed to perpetuate the behavior that causes the outcome that protesters are protesting against. I'd like you please to keep that in mind, because so many people are coming up with solutions and ideas and ways to change things. You know, recycling is one particular example that really annoys me. Yes, fine, it's good to recycle, but you haven't changed the system that caused all of that waste in the first place. So this is an important point we're going to keep coming back to, the idea that the system determines the behavior. So let's give some very specific examples, and I'd like to use the motor vehicle industry as a simple example of how complicated this system is. And we'll go through it, but it can apply to any other produced material. And I'd like you to think, instead of a motor vehicle as a mode of transport, I'd like to think of it as a means of suicide. Now, this is a bit of a heavy topic, but I'm trying to drive a point home. So carbon monoxide is a lethal gas. Nowadays, with catalytic converters and so on, we have managed to eliminate most of that lethal gas, but not all of it. And so, you know, in the 1950s or so, it was very common to commit suicide by simply connecting a pipe to your exhaust and piping it through the vehicle. Now, as frightening as this is, that motor vehicles are actually suicide machines, we've produced 1.4 billion motor vehicles on all of the world's roads. We all probably relied in some form on mechanized transport to get here today, despite the high use of bicycles in Amsterdam, which is great to see. So how is it that we all willingly get behind the steering wheel of a motor vehicle, even when we know that it is capable of killing an individual human? Let's look at all the different systems that make this an accepted behavior. Let's see. So we start with an unlikely group of organizations, faith-based organizations, religious systems. And my contention there is that we start with the idea that a human has a soul and an animal and a plant doesn't. And that simple teaching from our religious systems give us the mindset that says we can go and rape and pillage and do whatever we want to the living systems around us. It started with the extraction of oil. When oil started running out, we went to fracking, doing immense damage. But it's because we start with the mindset that humans are much more important than the living systems, and we can do whatever we want. Our public education systems, I'm sure you know, ancient old systems that came from the Industrial Revolution, where the education system itself teaches you not to think. Don't question anything. You've got somebody standing up in front of the class, they're the expert. I mean, when you can go and find out anything you want on the device that you're holding in your hand right now, why do we still teach children the way we do? One of the reasons is because it teaches conformity, and it drums home this idea of capitalism. So the education system is an important part of this. The media industry, obviously in movies and so on, it glamorizes the idea of driving big fancy cars, the constant pursuit of wealth and bigger homes. A lot of that is supported by the media industry. I'm going to go fairly quickly because I've been asked to keep this short. This is a particularly interesting one to me. So not only have we established that motor vehicles are suicide machines, we somehow have been taught to aspire to have one of these brands. So it's not even a case that it's a reluctant purchase when we go and buy a motor vehicle. We aspire to buy one of these. So that's an incredibly powerful form of influencing our behavior within this very complicated system that we're looking at just from the perspective of a motor vehicle. The credit industry, if you know anything about money, the creation of money starts with a loan. And most of us nowadays don't go and purchase a vehicle by paying cash. So you've created a loan just by creating money out of thin air, and that causes the entire GDP system to continue moving. So we have to have motor vehicle purchases because it's tied all the way back to the creation of money, which is what keeps our economies going. A complicated topic. I could do a whole talk just on the theory of money, but this is an important one. And if we were to stop the production of motor vehicles overnight, you'd stop global economies because you've stopped the creation of credit. The other thing that credit does is it removes you from the point of purchase. So prior to the invention of credit, there was a very strong connection to the thing that you were buying. You had to go and save up and make sure that there was enough money to be able to purchase the thing. And usually there was an understanding of what the impact is of your purchase. But nowadays with credit, you don't take out a loan. It's simple. You do it at the car dealership, and we completely disconnected between the act of making a purchase and the value of the thing that we're purchasing. We view the value of a motor vehicle more as what you're paying back every month rather than the total cost of ownership. The oil production industry is obviously closely tied into this entire process of motor vehicle ownership, specifically around the fact that they all colluded to muddy the waters around the impact that their industry has. I don't think we need to go into that, but you're probably aware of how they all work together, so that when they're talking about environmental impact within their organizations, they speak very frankly with each other. But whenever they're engaging with the press and the media and the public, they muddy the water and say that climate science can't easily be proven, and therefore they can't be held accountable. Where am I up to? Governments are an interesting one. They rely on the tax revenue that's generated from the sales of fuel to maintain road infrastructure. And so they're caught in a catch-22. They can't actually do anything about motor vehicles on the road, because if they were to cut off that tax revenue, it would be a huge impact on the functioning of their organization. So they're, of course, implicated in all of this. The medical industry is another one that's interesting to me. You wouldn't think that they're intimately involved with the motor vehicle industry. However, they're very aware of air pollution, causes lung cancer, heart disease, and a number of others. The medical industry enjoys the revenue from the treatment of those diseases. And so they are in a position to stand up and say, hold on, let's look at the cause. Why are so many people dying? 7 million people die every year as directly related to air pollution. Doctors are trained to address symptoms rather than address causes. And so they're implicated in this as well. If we all of a sudden stopped these 7 million deaths through air pollution, the medical industry loses, what is that amount there? $77 billion per year. That's a significant revenue drop. Again, just reminding you how all of these organizations and entities are involved in the simple idea of owning a motor vehicle. The sports industry is a really interesting one to me because my own country, South Africa, recently won the Rugby World Cup. And what was interesting to see there is, at least for a short period of time, the entire country was so caught up in the emotion and jubilation of winning Rugby World Cup that they completely forgot about corruption happening in the state, which is a very big thing right now. Everybody's all focused on how bad government is in South Africa. But for a period of about a week, everybody forgot about that. And there's an entire book, which there's a reference to it at the end of this talk, that speaks very clearly about how sport is an important release of negative energy. It's one way of stopping social disruption. So if we think about Extinction Rebellion and some of the things that they're doing in London and around the world, initially the idea of sport was to lessen that impact, keep people focused on something other than the social ills that their government is causing. So that's an interesting one. And then, of course, ourselves. To think very much about how we play an active role in this system that we've created. We've perhaps known for a long time that the system that we're within doesn't support thrivability, and yet we continue those behaviors. I think there would be a very simple design change to stop the use of motor vehicles almost overnight by simply routing the exhaust fumes through air conditioning ventilators. But of course, nobody would do that because of all these different industries and entities that would be impacted. So I wanted to run through that very quickly to show you how complex this is. And so any kind of solution is not going to be a simple answer. And I suggest to you that anybody who suggests they have an answer, they haven't fully understood how complicated this problem really is. Okay, so that's a little bit negative at this stage. I am otherwise optimistic. So let's just go back to this quote Donella Meadows about the systems and the patterns of behavior over time. And the question is, what can we do given all of this doom and gloom? So to me, the important thing about the system is that it's not set in stone. It's fluid. It changes. And part of that system is the data that keeps the system going. So think at a very macro level just about GDP. We always measure the GDP of a nation, and that's one of the key criteria. Filter that down, it translates into what we earn as individuals, the cars that we drive, the vacations that we go on, the education that you get. All of these are kind of status symbols that fit within this model of GDP. From a company's perspective, all they think about is income, profit and loss, expenses. So all of the reporting that we look at is based around this idea of GDP. If you looked at all of the photographs that Andre showed earlier, they were photographs. Nowhere was there any mention made of sounds that come from whales and dolphins, sounds that come from trees, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. So the idea here is that what you focus on, what you measure, becomes the structure of the system that you're in. Towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to give some examples of other kinds of data. And really what I'm trying to do is show you that what we're measuring currently might not be the right sources of data. I'd like you to think at this point about two very different kinds of growth. So the one is a living systems growth. So think of a forest where everything is thriving and abundant. And the important thing around the growth in that system is that it's self-regulating. So the plants themselves are communicating with each other and balancing themselves based on the resources and nutrients and sunlight and oxygen and all those good things that make a living system possible. There's no structure to that, not apparent to us anyway, and yet the growth there is abundant and green and thriving. And then there's the type of growth that humans have created, where it's comparable to cancerous cells. It just keeps consuming and consuming and consuming. And it's not self-regulating. So coming back to data and how we measure systems, we haven't figured out how to measure the living systems kind of growth. The other important point about growth is that there are whole movements of people now calling for degrowth or post-growth. Now, in a living system, you can't stop growth. If you stop growth, the system dies. So I don't believe that degrowth is a viable option. That would stop the progress of humanity. So I think the issue is more thinking about what is the kind of growth that we want to pursue as a species. Those are the kind of questions that I think we should consider as we're thinking about the career that you're heading off on. So I'm going to keep it quite simple as talking about game A, which is everything about our mechanistic systems growth models that we've implemented ever since the agricultural revolution, ever since we started automating how we deal with the land. It's been a mechanistic growth system. So let's just, for simplicity's sake, call that game A. And some of the properties of game A is that it's rivalrous, there's zero sum, in other words, only one person wins. It's a highly complicated and fragile system. And we're seeing the fragility of that system now in talking about climate change. Climate change is just one way of encapsulating how fragile this entire system is. Game B is an alternative to that. And it's an emerging thing that's coming out right now. Nobody can fully describe what game B is. But I encourage you to go and Google it. There are some very interesting discussions going online. There's a couple of Facebook groups. I'm not a big Facebook fan, but the one group I do visit is a group called Game B. And they're considering very different anti-rivalrous, abundant, complex, anti-fragile, auto-propagating ideas of governance within a society, ideas of value exchange between individuals. So Game B, at the moment, nobody has any answers. It's just a tag that aggregates a whole lot of these different projects, all working towards this idea of how do we replicate the way abundant growth happens in nature, as opposed to the mechanistic growth that we have in the human system currently. I wanted to go through very quickly some barriers to Game A growth, and these were identified in the 1970s. Donella Meadows, who I've quoted before, wrote the Club of Rome report called Limits to Growth. So she identified all of this in the 1970s. This is nothing new to us, but we've tended to ignore it because the system itself makes it very difficult for us to change our behaviors. And then for each point, I'm going to give you a little example of it. So this collaboration and coherence, you may argue this, it doesn't limit it. I mean, look at the collaboration that Andre spoke about earlier, having all these nations coming together, building this massive contraption up in the sky. That's huge collaboration. Think about the internet, how we can communicate, bring groups together. That's huge collaboration. The thing is that there are limits to that. And one of the questions at the end of Andre's talk was talking about those limits, the fact that we have different measuring systems, different time zones. So we've created systems that actually make our level of collaboration quite limited. Think about Extinction Rebellion. Very recently, they caused a huge uproar in London where people climbed onto the roof of the underground and stopped commuters getting to work. And people got very upset about that and eventually dragged them off the roof. That was an example of somebody thinking they were collaborating towards the outcome that the group wanted, but actually having a reverse effect. We're finding now that when we're trying to get together large groups of people that represent very many different groups, it's really difficult. Any of you who've done any kind of social science research, you'll know how difficult this is. So it's because Game A itself, the way we've set up the way that we collaborate, there are limitations in it. Let's go through this a little quicker. Oops. Okay, so the interdependence is obscured by mechanistic goals. And the very simple idea here is that we're all independent. The whole point of Western progress has been around this idea of independence. You've got to go out, fend for yourself, get the best degree, get the best job, but not taking into account how interdependent we all are. So no living system feedback systems. Donella Meadows has a very interesting example of when you're in the shower and the temperature isn't quite right. So you adjust the temperature and then all of a sudden it's too hot because it takes some time for the water to run through. And then you respond and make it colder, but it's too cold. So the same thing happens in nature. The kind of feedback that we're seeing now through the satellite images that were shown, that damage occurred 20 years ago. And because it takes so long in a mechanistic system for that feedback to have any impact on us, by the time we recognize it and can take some kind of action, it's almost too late. Distorted informational loops. So right now, the most powerful informational loops we receive is through advertising. We're constantly being told what things we should strive for, what purchases we must make, what car we must buy, what holiday we must go on, what makeup we must wear. Those are the most predominant informational loops that we receive as consumers within the system that we have right now. We get almost no feedback from nature. Restricted learning and development, I spoke about that our education systems are designed from the Industrial Revolution. Empathy and love is not counted. You never hear those words mentioned in business. Think about the last time you saw a nature documentary where it drove home very clearly, let's say it was a pride of lions. It shows how the empathy within that pride enables the pride of lions to succeed. We never speak about that in the human system. Responsiveness to pain is blocked. This is a very big one. When I mentioned the meaning crisis, there are, I forget the numbers now, hundreds of thousands of youth are committing suicide right now because they don't know what to do. They see the kind of protests happening, they see the damage that my generation has done, and they realize how complicated and difficult the solution is. And we are not responding to that pain. It's because the system itself hasn't allowed any kind of pain to be addressed. So coming back to the idea, the system determines the behavior. And what I'm suggesting is that the story that is told, as I mentioned before, is based on what we record and report. And so my question to you is, what kind of storyteller do you want to be? Do you want to play game A? Because that's what your education right now is preparing you for. Or do you want to play game B? Game B is something that isn't quite defined yet. It's going to require courage of you. It's going to require the ability to step away from what you've been taught and what you've been conditioned to accept as normal, and to really push the boundaries of what this game really is. And my hope is that game B would be more appealing to you than game A. So that's the question. How does this affect you? You're a computer scientist. Maybe you're not that concerned about the environment. I should have brought this up earlier. So the kind of system we create is determined by what we measure it, how we measure it, and then how we communicate it. So the way that you're probably familiar with data being communicated is through the media, television stations telling you certain things, but it's the wrong kind of data. It's data about a mechanistic system. It's not data about a living system. So I wanted to give you some quick, and I'll go through this very quickly, just as examples to show you that there are people working on some pretty woo-woo and way-out ideas there, but it's supporting the emergence of this idea of game A. So the Global Consciousness Project is random number generators that just spew out random numbers, but what they've proved is when groups of people come together, a group as small as this, or larger groups, that the patterns in the randomness of that, in the random data start appearing. And they are formulating a hypothesis that whenever we get together like this, there is something occurring in the consciousness of the group that we may not be aware of individually. Some very interesting work that's going on there. The Global Coherence Initiative looks at the magnetic resonance of the Earth and how it affects us. Very interesting stuff there. I won't go through the details. I'm running a little short on time. Includes the Global Tree Potential Project. So you've heard of IoT, which is the Internet of Things. I much prefer this. It's the Internet of Trees. And they are measuring signals from trees, showing how trees communicate, showing how trees can predict earthquakes. It's a fascinating body of work, this, and that data to me is much more interesting than GDP. Here's a new kind of token. There's only one. I said at the beginning that I'm not interested in crypto, but there is one that I'm particularly passionate about because it uses the idea of signals, which is really just data, to initiate some positive actions towards the human condition and the planet's condition. So they've just launched. If you're interested in crypto, I highly recommend that you look into them. I've got nothing to do with them, but I am very involved in the design of where they're going with this. So here's a very quick possible Amsterdam strategy. So I looked at some of the biggest events in Amsterdam. There's an Amsterdam dance event, which I didn't know about until I started Googling this. There's the Gay Pride event. There's King's Day. These are all events that happen in the city that bring large numbers of people together. So what could be done with a global coherence project to work with that body of people? To introduce a coherence monitoring system. Introduce seeds, and if you pick up the slides from this link, a co-investment local economy is a very interesting paper to read. But using seeds to kickstart something within Amsterdam that causes a circular economy. There's an initiative that kicked off in the middle of this year using Kate Rayworth's work called Amsterdam Circular, and it talks about how do we turn Amsterdam's economy into a circular economy. It's unfortunately still rooted in Game A principles, but if you were inspired to take some of this and introduce some of these ideas and turn it into a true circular economy, I think there's some incredible things that could be done around that. And that, to me, would be a powerful way of using data to tell an entirely new story for Amsterdam. Very briefly, this is a quick diagram to show visually what we're trying to do with all of this that I've presented. And it's to show value flows through an entirely new Game B system. So we're looking at all of the key players in society and saying, how could we make value flows positive in a Game B environment? It's fascinating stuff. And I could do another 2-hour talk on that, which I won't do right now. So what I wanted to do in the talk is just give you an idea that there is something called Game B. We can't yet define what Game B is. To me, Game B is the essence of Society 4. And unless we figure out the rules of Game B and how to effectively play Game B, we will never get to Society 4. And it's my contention that as data scientists and technologists, you're the guys who are going to be reporting. You're the people that are going to influence the outcome of the story. And I look forward to seeing what that story will be. Thanks very much. How did I go?
A very loud applause. I think you did well. And I enjoyed your story as well. So we're again going to take questions from the audience. I'm just asking to the people if they can start thinking about it. But I was really impressed with the introduction of the system thinking that you seem to have inside your brain and how you see this world. And I must say, I just finished watching The Matrix again. And The Matrix shows us that there are systems indeed, but you also need to have a system to change systems.
Yep.
Now, what is the system that we have in society that we can use to change the systems that we want to change?
What a great question. Grassroots. So us sitting right here. So one of the strategies that we're working on is a series of festivals where people who come to the festivals are the people who are most passionate about seeing the change in the system. It's a complicated process, but that's where you start, because our existing institutions are just not geared for making the kind of changes that they're the ones that perpetuate the behavior of the system. So it comes from you and I, grassroots initiatives.
I was expecting maybe a slightly different answer. I've been studying this a little bit as well. I see a lot of grassroots initiatives, and they're really nice. They're like beautiful flowers next to the road, and they're very cute, and you can touch them, and they smell nicely. But so far, only real revolutions changed the systems that we have in society. Mm-hmm. Do you know examples of grassroots movements that really got into the heart of systems and was really able to change them?
Another great question. So no is the short answer. There aren't any grassroots movements that today have made a significant enough impact because of the limitations to our collaboration. So you're right, the beautiful flowers, it smells and looks good, but nothing happens. So I want to just plant some ideas. We're working right now with a music management company who between the music stars that they represent can reach 2 billion people on the planet. That's the kind of scale at which things need to happen. So you've got music stars, you've got 2 billion people, you inspire them to do something at scale, and then we see what happens from there. So we've got a 10-year plan unrolling right now. It's complicated stuff, I can't give you all the details, but that's the kind of scale at which this needs to happen. It's not small little grassroots movements working on their own.
Last question before we go to the audience, and I really hope that there are a lot of questions there as well. But don't you think that music is not just another example of how you mentioned that sports are also a way to distract systems? I mean, I see quite some similarities between concerts where people are dancing and screaming and the type of aggression that you've been describing at sports events. How is music different from sports in that sense?
Yeah, he doesn't ask easy questions, does he? So from a music perspective, we see that this is the only industry that we can identify so far that ignores people's differences. When we go to a music concert, we forget our religious differences, our political differences, our socio-economic differences. We're coming there to enjoy the music. Yes, there are occasions when stuff happens, but generally speaking, we think that music, if used in a conscious manner, and that's a key difference than just the way a standard concert is produced, then it has a chance to do something at the kind of scale that we're looking at. Just quickly, if I may, as an analogy of what we're going through right now, I spent some time with Elizabeth Sartouris, who's a evolution biologist, and she gave me hope because she talks about the caterpillar story, where the imaginal cells that contain the DNA of the caterpillar, I beg your pardon, of the butterfly, exist in the caterpillar, but not every caterpillar turns into a butterfly. The race is for those imaginal cells to come together quickly enough before the nutrients of the caterpillar disappear. Humanity is in that space right now, and we must figure out how to get those imaginal cells together quickly enough.
Great answer. Let's go to the people in the hallway. Is there someone who wants to ask a question to Michael? Can you throw, Michael? Yeah, it's here. I can help. Just throw high and far. 1, 2, 3.
Where am I going?
There.
There we go.
Woo! Wow! Oh. Yeah.
Better than Andre.
Hi. First of all, thanks for your story. Also, I'm not going to ask very easy questions.
Oh.
I'm sorry for that.
Go for it.
So you made some analogies with growth, with how nature grows. And as far as I see, nature has quite a battle. And not everything grows so smoothly, but only because most things in nature aren't that powerful, they can't overrule the rest. Isn't that maybe where the problem with humans come from? That there's too much power, which makes us able to make this mechanistic growth?
Yeah, you're right. It is a difficult question. I think what you're asking has to do with what we perceive to be human nature and the fact that there is this constant rivalry and trying to get to the top of the pyramid. And it's my contention that it's the system itself that causes that behavior, and that how we have evolved is because of the system itself. This is a long conversation, so I'm going to try and give as simple as possible answer as possible. Nature is competitive, but it is also collaborative. And so the fact that a lion hunts a buck on the plains of Africa is part of a bigger system. And the fact that that hunt happens and that the buck dies means that it's completing a full circle of life. Watch The Lion King. There's a new reproduction of The Lion King, and it talks about it beautifully. So we haven't figured out how to do that complete circle of life yet. The circular economy initiative that is kicked off in Amsterdam, it's going to run for 5 years from 2020 to 2025, is an attempt to get this right. It'll be interesting to follow that project to see if they do.
Thank you for your answer. Maybe we can go upstairs to see if there is another question from there. We didn't even have to throw the thing there.
Thank heavens.
Yeah.
So I share your concerns about the current state of humanity and everything we're seeing about that. And I don't think technology can solve all of these problems, and I think societal change is much more important. And so even though I'm very passionate about technology, I've joined Extinction Rebellion. I'm spending a lot of time at that movement. But that's not exactly a career path of sorts. So what would you say is the best way for me, for someone like me, for someone here in the audience to get involved with this movement, perhaps from the technological background, but actual forcing societal change? Where should we start?
Wow. What a great question, because it gives me a chance to punt what we're doing. So firstly, let me talk about Extinction Rebellion. We say that there are 3 things that must happen for major social change to happen. Stop, reset, go. Stop doing the actions that we know are harming us. And that's what Extinction Rebellion is making very visible, and they're doing a great job of it. However, they haven't got to the second point, which is reset. How do we think about resetting the behaviors that we have within the system in which we find ourselves? And once we've tested some of those approaches, how do we go at scale? So what we're putting together is something called the Tipping Point Festival, which is a whole mix of stuff that takes all of these complicated things into account. And we very much need data scientists. And these are paid positions. We're not yet funded, so we can't offer it to you immediately. But my answer would be to check out the Tipping Point system, tippingpointfestival.org, and get involved in some way there. It's great that you're involved with Extinction Rebellion, but remember that all they're saying at this stage is stop. We must provide some kind of alternative, otherwise they're going to start pissing people off, excuse the language. The Occupy movement no longer exists, and that's because all they could do is say stop. You've got to move beyond that to talk about the reset and what comes after that. Does that help?
Great answer. No, sorry, I want to have one more question from someone else, if there is someone who wants to ask a question. There
Talk
in
to
the
me
back.
afterwards.
Yeah. So it's coming to you from the side. Watch out. You should look there, yeah, and catch it. Yeah. It was be switched on. Yeah, no, yeah.
Hey, yeah.
Hi!
So you're saying we should stop doing the actions that harm us, but then again you said that everything is interconnected, and we, for example, cannot stop producing cars because this will ruin the economy. So where do we draw the line? How deep do we go into searching the source as to what to change? Because we can't just delete the entire system and start anew, because we have to live in the meantime somehow. So where do you end?
What's the tipping point?
Yeah, so the Tipping Point Festival consists of a number of different tipping points, and the first one is here, is with me. The internal tipping of me realizing, number one, that I'm part of a system that's causing the behavior, and that's a deep personal inner journey. I think there's quite some spiritual shifts involved in that. I liken it to walking away from a traditional religion. I had to walk away from a religion, and I can tell you it's one of the most difficult things I did, because I assumed I was going to burn in hell and God would strike me down, and, well, I'm still here. But that's how deep the inner change is required. So start on that journey, and part of the Tipping Point Festival will be bringing that. We're kicking off in 2020. Beyond that, we have no answers. We can sense of things that need to happen, but this is hugely complicated, and I don't have any answers. Great question.
Michael, you remind me a little bit of the architect in the Matrix,
You're right.
which also pops up at some point in the lives of the people and is giving people the option to go to two doors. Huh?
The red pill or the blue pill?
Yeah, well, that was Morpheus, but the architect had 2 doors on offering. And I think you really inspired us today to think about those 2 doors. And you explained us that there is a second door. And I would really like to thank you on behalf of all students. Please, a warm applause for Michael.
Thank you very much.
Here.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.